one of the things that you often have to do when you are building out PHP applications and frameworks is provide the ability to either view or download PDF files. So this video is going to show how that's achieved with CakePHP 4 and Browsershot by Spatie, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Apologies if not. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to start with is just creating a CakePHP project, and we're going to call that Browsershot. And once we've created our project, we just change into the directory and start our code editor. And the next thing we need to do is, if we use bin cake server, this server is, I think, single threaded, so you can't have multiple clients making requests of it because it doesn't work. So we need to provide for ourselves the ability for multiple clients to connect to our development environment. So to do that, I'm going to use a pre-created working example of a Docker environment. So I've got a Docker folder which has the Docker files and configurations for the containers, and I'm just going to copy the Docker Compose YAML file and a .env example file. I'm going to move that into my current project, and then I'm going to just copy, so we go copy .env example to .env, and then just make changes. So let's 93 will do, just to our ports that are published. Each container publishes its service on an external port, and this is just making sure they don't collide with anything else I've got installed. And going to Docker Compose here and just show you that we've got a Redis container, Nginx container, we've got a PHP container and a MySQL container. Now this Docker file also has mailhog for email testing, so I'm just going to remove that so that we don't have more containers than we need. And I might also change this so it's a bit more descriptive. It's not browser, it's Browsershot. So that just gives us our networks with a name that makes sense. And we're going to have a volume as well to hold the MySQL data there as well. So once we've got that working, so Docker Compose up and then daemonize, and it looks as if something is not right here. I think we just need to comment our mailhog there, and we should now be right to go. Right, so there's our, it's a 3 container environment. If we go across to our Docker desktop here, we can see that it's running. Clicking on the Nginx container, that's our web front end, we can see that currently we don't have a database connected, so let's go and do that. Now, the database configuration is automatically created when the container is created, and so we can just copy and paste the host name, which is this name here in our Docker Compose file, MySQL, and then these credentials here. So going here, we just change localhost to MySQL because it's talking to another container, and then dev test is our username password and database. So just double checking, and we're good. Now once we've got that connected, we now need to just have a users table, something for login, because we're not just going to get Browsershot running with no authentication. That's not typically how you do it, and so we're going to look at how you can get Browsershot to authenticate with your application in one way. Obviously there's more than one way to do it, so you decide for yourself what's best for your situation. So creating a bin cake migrations. Let's have a look at the status. And notice what's happened here when I've attempted to run a migration status. The reason for this is that I'm still in my Ubuntu environment, but I've actually created a bunch of containers, and we need to develop from within our PHP container. So first thing I do is just connect VS Code to the container, and then when I go in and go bin cake migration status, we'll notice that that's now working properly. It's connecting. Now this xdebug stuff, that can be a little annoying, so I'm just going to double check to make sure in my PHP container. Yeah, so my Docker configuration file is literally being mounted into the container here. So I can go into my Docker folder and just get the PHP ini file and turn off xdebug, and then you could do this with the GUI, or you could do this with, hit the restart button here, and then you'd obviously have to reconnect to the container, so reload, and just go bin cake migrations status again, and there we don't have our xdebug bothering us. So now we need to create a table in our database that's going to handle our users. So if we go bin cake bake migration, and we want an email field, we also want an auth token field. So we're going to use something specifically for token authentication here. So, and we also want a password field, so we're going to use password and form authentication as well. And finally, we've got just our standard default CakePHP created and modified fields as well. So it says the class name is not correct, and that is because we need to give it. So when it sees create and it sees users, it knows that create means create a table, users is the table name. So once we've done that, we can have a look at our migration that it's created and double check. So we never want the email to be null, so that's good. We do sometimes want our auth token to be null, make it nullable, because we wouldn't assign a token to everybody if in real life. We certainly don't want our password to be null, and yeah, that's good enough for us now. So let's run the migration to create our database. And that's all we need for creating the database. Now we're going to look at implementing authentication, it's really follow the bouncing ball. So go to the authentication website and just start running all the commands. So that's created all our views and that for the, so if you have a look here, I think I need to, what was it, Nginx, let's have a look, go to users here, that's created all our views and those sorts of things, that last command. Now we want to set a password field, so we want to hash the password, we don't want plain text passwords. So to do that, we need to go and create a setter method within our model entity class, the user one, and we just need to specify that class there. And if we have a look at the moment, notice it just uses CakeAuth default password hasher, and it probably wouldn't be a problem just to use that, but what we're going to do is just index our workspace using IntelliFence again, and then try, and we're going to see that we now have access to the authentication plugins default password hasher. Now all I'm doing there is auto importing. That's one of the things that the IntelliFence extension, which you can see here, has, it brings to the table, just pulling things in automatically so you don't have to type them in yourselves. So the default password hash has been included there. Now we need to make changes to our SRC application file to pull in all the classes needed to enable authentication. And we go up the top and we just go underneath our other use statements, just pull those in. Now we need to implement this authentication provider interface in this class, and that's going to complain at the moment because we're missing that get authentication service method. So the next step is to, after routing middleware, just include the authentication middleware. So we go into the middleware method here, find the routing middleware, and then just enter the next line and put authentication middleware into the mix. Then we copy and paste our get authentication service method, and that can be all the defaults for the time being. And here in the app controller method we need to load, so load this component. So going into our list, we go into controller, we go app controller, and then we can see in the initialize method, just pop that in, and that's all we need. Now the next one is in the users controller, and it's asking us to implement a before filter method to mark the login method as unauthenticated, so anyone can access that and they won't be denied. So let's go into the users controller, paste in our before filter to add an unauthenticated method there. We also, for the purposes of the demonstration, we want to be able to add users or register a user without having to log in. So we're just going to add that as unauthenticated as well. The login method currently says when you successfully log in, redirect to an articles controller. We don't have one, so we're just specifying one we do have. So redirect to the index method of users. And then we go back to our authentication, and we see that we've got a login template here. So we need to go down to our templates, choose users, and then create a new login PHP file. And let's have a look at our next things. So here, this is by default, the tutorial says, hey, you probably want everybody to look at index and view methods and those sorts of things, but we're not going to do that. And then here we need to implement a logout method so that people can log out of the application. So that's good, and then it just redirects to the login action when you've done a logout. Now, enabling registrations, we've already done that. We've just added the add method to unauthenticated actions. So now we're pretty much there. Let's go and have a look at what happens. So we try to access the application and it says, no, you're not authenticated. So we don't have a user yet, so we're going to add a user. So user at example.com. We're not going to add an auth token at the moment, but there's 1, 2, 3, just 3 ones. That's it. And now I don't know why, but this happens every single time that I am developing with debug mode on. It just seems to. So start again. Okay, the user has been saved. Now it just seems to not work the first time. So now we can log in, 3 ones, and we now have ourselves happily logged in. Now you can see that we're logging in, and once we're logged in, we get we're now using session authentication. So it's basically from now on, once you log in, it just passes the session back and forwards to the server, and it knows that you're a valid user. What we're going to do to give ourselves some menu items to work with, just going to close all this down and use the index method of the users template and grab some code from our view to add a sidebar to our. So we're going to create a PDF view link, and the action, it's going to be different. It's going to be, we're going to create another controller just to handle this, and we're going to create a create method to create a PDF. And then we're going to do one that's slightly different, and this one is PDF download, and it's still going to call the create method, but it's going to pass in a query string to say, yeah, I want to download. And then finally, just to give ourselves a logout option, we're going to say controller is, actually it's this is currently, it'll default to that, so we just say logout, and the action will be logout, and we don't need that. So let's have a look. Great, so we've got logout working, we're logging in successfully, authentication's working. Now we need to start to flesh out our PDF controller and a couple of methods in there. So going to our command line again, bin cake bake controller PDF, no actions, and that will give us a PDF controller which is a clean slate. Now we're first going to create a create method, as we mentioned. Just remove the, and then we're going to create a a HTML method. So with this, we are going to, in the create method, that's where we're going to implement our Browsershot code, and in the HTML method, that's where we're going to implement creating a we're going to create a dummy invoice in HTML. So let's do that. To get started then, let's look at our HTML. Now by default, if we connect to this HTML action, you can see it's, if we type in HTML here, you can see that it's missing a template, and by default that template would be named HTML. But we're going to make a slight change to that. We're going to create a different name template just to get away from Cake conventions for a while. So we're going to grab the view builder for this request, and then we're going to say set template, and the template is just going to be Browsershot. Okay, so again, trying that again, it's still failing because there's no Browsershot template. So we go into here, and we know that the request we're making is the PDF controller, so we need a PDF directory. And then if we've specified just Browsershot as the template, then all we need to do is specify a Browsershot PHP file. So now let's have a look at that. And the first thing we notice is we're not going to send as a PDF document this heading and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to now change our layout so that it doesn't include that. So to do that, we've got templates layouts, and we can organize our layouts folder by creating directory structure in it, and this just keeps things nice and contained. And we're going to call, so the default layout for our Browsershot usage is going to be just a HTML file, and I'm going to change that so that it doesn't cause more problems. And here in the body of the document, we're just going to say this fetch and content. So by default, everything that's printed out by a view or a template is rendered inside this content block here. So let's have a look at that now. And why isn't that working? Well, we haven't told the view builder about it. So now we're going to say, okay, don't just use a different template, use a different layout as well. Now, that layout is located in the Browsershot directory. So looking at that, its layout would be the root, and then Browsershot default, and that's now giving us what should be a blank page. Now here we have the bare bones now to create an invoice. Now typically an invoice would do database requests and all that sort of stuff, but we're just going to create a dummy invoice that doesn't do that. So to do that, we're going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to go back to one that I prepared earlier. Now every invoice that I know of uses a logo, so we're going to just copy a generic logo into our project, going to webroot to the images directory and just paste that in. Then we're going to go back and grab our template that we've already created. So here it is, so the Browsershot template. Now if we open this and just have a look at it, we can see that it's got a call to faker and then it's got adding a provider so that we can pull in all sorts of different things, but specifically we're adding a provider to Faker so that we can use product names. So just generic product names, it'll generate them for us automatically. So I'm going to copy all of that and then go into my template here, so Browsershot template, and just paste this in. Now, what we notice first of all when we scroll to the top is that we're missing these classes. So let's install those. Now, typically, if you're installing Faker and those sorts of things, they'd be pulled in under required dev. So maybe we can do that as well. Just say required dev, even though the application wouldn't run in production without it. But so we just pull that one in, and then we go to our provider collection here and pull that in, and specify that. So notice what that's done to our composer.json file. It's just pulled in Faker and the provider collection there. So now when we go back, if we again index our workspace, we'll find that VS Code will pick those classes that we've just installed up, and we know that they're now being seen. So what's going to be seen now? Well, here we can see a skeleton of a invoice when we call our HTML method. There's a bit of an issue there with something's wrong with our code. So just going to line 60, was it? Or let me just keep going, I can't remember. So it's saying grand total is what would you say? Grand total is uninitialized, I suppose. Grand total. So I'm just going to set grand total to that, and let's see if that gets rid of that. Now, what we're seeing at the moment is that it's got no styling. Everything's bunched up to the side. So just going to do it the wrong way, and we're just going to move across to the latest version here as well. So if you're not seeing the latest version, you just need to use the drop down to choose the all versions and get to the latest. So here we have CDN links, but we can just pull it from straight here because that'll give us, yep. So there we go. Copy that in. Go into our layout file. So do you remember it was here? And just specify that we want to pull in some styling. So there we go. So we've pulled in our Bootstrap CSS framework there into this page, and now it's being laid out like it should be. Just a reminder, these addresses are not real. I just hope YouTube doesn't ban the video for this. But anyway, so we've got our nicely rendered HTML here, and we might now say to ourselves, well, okay, what's the next step? Well, it's to get Browsershot running. So just close all these pages. So we've got an invoice ready to render in Browsershot. Let's go to our Spatie's Browsershot pages here, and notice the installation steps. Just require here, so that's what we need to do, just pull that in. Now when we do that, what we'll notice is that we've got the package, but there's a little bit more involved. So let's have a look here. It says this requires Puppeteer. So you then need to go to the requirements page, and it's saying installing it on Mac OS. It doesn't really make a difference that we're in a Linux container, but let's now install that. So install Puppeteer just in the root of your project. And what that will have done is, if we have a refresh here, waiting one moment for it to install, but it will have created a package JSON file in the root of your project with the dependencies there. So that's all that's required to install it. You may or may not, so if you have a look in Node modules here and scroll down to Puppeteer, it does install its own version of Chrome. So you may or may not need to use apt-get install Chromium to install Chromium or Google Chrome, but the open source version in your container. So that's now installed Browsershot. Let's start to work on the code in our PDF controller. So we've got this here, so we want to create a PDF and we want to create it out of the contents of this view. Firstly, let's get a reference. So we're going to create some PDF. So we've got browser, and it's not being seen. So let's index our workspace again, and using a URL. So the URL that we want is, if we use the cake router, we can specify that the action that we want to call is this HTML action right beside us there. And what we're wanting to do is we're just wanting to return PDF so that we can then submit it to the view. Now when we go and do that, so we just get our PDF view here, notice what we'll get. It says failed to launch the browser process, no usable sandbox. And this is an issue with running inside a container. I'm not exactly sure why, but you can investigate it. But Spatie has provided a command that says no sandbox. So just trying that again. And it says cannot navigate to invalid URL. So this is the URL that's currently being passed to the file, to the Browsershot process, I should say. Now we need to give our Browsershot process a little bit more help than that. So we need to say, okay, what are we connecting to? Well, the host that we're connecting to is the Nginx host. Now inside, so it's not actually the PHP container we're connecting to. We're connecting to the web front end, so that's Nginx. Now how do we know that? Well, Docker Compose YAML has the service name as Nginx, and that's the front end for all web requests. So we need to address the Nginx container. So that's our host. Let's try again. Now this time the error message is, notice how that when we're talking to Nginx from outside the container, we're talking to this forward port, which is this 6093. But within the container network, all the ports are actually their default ports. So if you have a look inside Docker Compose at the Nginx container, Nginx is running on port 80. So we need to go into here and now specify, okay, not only do I want to connect to Nginx host, I also want to connect to port 80. So again, let's try that again. Now this time, it's saying, hey, I tried to render this content, but there was no create template. So the create template would obviously be in here, and you'd create, but we're not doing that. We're sending PDF back to the browser. So now we need to do something like this. We say response equals this request. No. Get response, that's the one I want. Okay, the response is this, and what we want to do with the response is we want to, have you noticed how often you do that? You just miss one letter. Alright, so we want to go with a string body of PDF, and while you're at it, just say with a type, and you can just specify it like that simply. And then finally, let's return that response to the client. Now here, we notice that when we return the PDF, it's returning a string. So yes, with string body, and we pass the PDF. Now let's see if that works. Alright, so now we've got another problem. Now it's sending us back PDF, and Browsershot's done its best, but Browsershot is getting a login window because it's not authorized to connect to the application. So what we want to do now is we want to implement some sort of authentication, and we're going to use CakePHP Token Authentication. Now, just bear with me as I try to stumble my way through this, but where do we go to get some information on what we're doing? Well, if you have a look at your SRC, sorry, not your SRC, your vendor directory, under CakePHP, the authentication directory is where all the authentication plugin files are located. And we have a docs subdirectory here with all the documentation. Now, when we have a look here, it can be a little bit confusing, but in this middleware document, it basically shows that in the get authentication service hook method in your application.php file, you can specify, like firstly you've got session authentication, form authentication, and then you've got identifiers as well, so all those sorts of things. But you can specify token authentication and have an authenticator and an identifier using token authentication. So let's copy that and go to SRC application, and we're just going to feel our way towards a configuration that works. So notice we've got the authenticators there, so we're going to just put the authenticator after the other style of authentication, and because the identifier is at the top, I'm just going to add the authenticator after this first one, the password authentication, because this is a different style of authentication. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to support authentication by token and identify people by that method, and we're going to also then allow them in if they are identified correctly using a token. So if we go to our users here and we just log out, what we're going to do now is just pretend to try and log in using a token. And the first thing we notice is that it redirects us because it can't identify us. So token equals, let's go 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to, I'm going to just create a, let's edit that so that I can get back to it really quickly. Right, save. And I'll rename it so I remember. Token test. Alright, so every time I try and connect to this with a token in the query string, it's telling me no. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find out why that is. Let's have a look at our identifiers here. So if we go down in identifiers, firstly it starts with password, and we can see that the password identifier is set up to specify the email field and the password field to identify a user logging in with a password. And when we're using form authentication, they're the same forms that same fields that it uses to authenticate with. So makes sense. So now we're going to scroll down and find the token authentication area, and notice that it says the field in the database to check against default is token. And if you have a look at our migration, what did I name the token field? It's auth_token. So it's never going to work while ever the identifier is not configured to use the correct token field. So what we're going to do is go into our identifier here, so our token identifier, and we're going to add a configuration array, and we're going to take the token field and specify it correctly as auth_token. So let's try that again. So again, still not working. So why is that? Well, when we look at the authenticator, what's happening there? Well, let's go back into our documentation. We're now looking at authenticators here, and notice in authenticator, if we scroll up, we can see it specifies that session and form authenticators, they're already in use, but now it's got the token section. It says these are the configuration options. So we're going to now copy these particular configuration options. Let's try that a bit better. That's it, and place them in our configuration options here for authentication. So notice there it says the query param that we want to query on is token. We're already entering that. And the authenticator is going to be working on this default, and that's token. But still, when we try, it's not allowing us in. So let's log in using standard form and password authentication to see why that is. And the reason is quite simply we have not specified a token. So let's put a token in the same as what we've got in our test URL there. 1, 2, 3. Then log out so that we can test it. And now let's try it. Right, so now passing a token in the query string has worked successfully. So we now have token authentication working correctly. But just look in here, look in the documentation and try and nut it out. The default resolver is the database. So it knows that it grabs the users table and then it will pull in the token field, which we've specified as auth_token here. So yeah, that's all that's needed currently to get it working. And it works in tandem with these other methods too. So any of these methods will work. Session, of course, is first because yeah, as soon as you've got a session, you don't want to be doing the other authentications at all, do you? So now we've got that working. Let's just disable query string authentication. So I'm going to log out and go token test again, and notice now that I've disabled the query param token, it's saying, look, it's not specified, so don't use it. And that's a little bit of a security thing, so that that if there is the risk of giving away your tokens by doing GET requests in them. So it's a lot more secure, obviously, to do a POST request. So now let's go back to our PDF controller and we'll close the other fields. And now let's see if we can get this to authenticate using the information in the request. So we're going to say this request get attribute, and we're looking for the identity attribute. And if we have a look at this, we might just call it identity. Notice what it is when we're authenticated. Let's have a look. So we might want to 111. Right. So notice what happens when we're authenticated. Basically we're getting hold of the authenticated user's object, and now we're going to grab from that object. If we go back, we're going to grab the auth token. So let's call it auth token, and from this identified user we're going to do a get and take the auth token. So now we've got an auth token to be used by Browsershot in passing authentication through to create a PDF. So we're no longer going to get access denied. So we're going to say set extra HTTP headers. Now in our, let's have a look at that, src application file, notice that what we've got is we've got the header. We can set these all for ourselves, so they can all be set to things that aren't default, but these are the defaults. So we're going to be looking for the authorization header, and the token must have a prefix of token. So let's copy those so that we can see them. And alright, so that's what we're trying to create, aren't we? So we're going to create an authorization header with the quantities, the following. So we want to go sprintf, and it's going to be token, and then whatever is in auth token for the user. Now let's hope this works. Let's see what happens. And have I gotten rid of the dump and die statement? I have, so this is good. And now notice what's happening with this. It's creating a PDF, so Browsershot successfully authenticating, but we have an issue here with the layout. It's just not seeming to lay out properly. To figure out what's going on with things, we can make a temporary change here and just choose this. We go console messages. So instead of outputting PDF, just give us the console messages and dump and die them. And what will that show? So these are the messages output by Chromium and Browsershot. Notice here it says access to this style sheet that I've studiously pasted in is not available from this area. So how can we fix this? Well, let's go to our Browsershot documentation and search for fixing cause issues. Now this is the bodgy way to do it. So all we have to do is copy and paste disable web security in. So let's cancel, so comment that out, disable the web security, and then try again. And notice now that it's formatted nicely, but it's a little bit ugly still. So what we're going to do is we're going to set some margins, and 15, 15, 15, 15. Let's try that again. Now that is the dodgy way of fixing the problem. So we've disabled web security, but do we really want to do that? Let's now have a look at another way of fixing this issue, and we're going to install our Bootstrap front-end framework with Composer. And then go into our vendor directory, go down and find Twitter Bootstrap, go to the distribution directory and find just our Bootstrap min CSS file. So our minified CSS file here. Go back to our web root and to our CSS folder and just paste in Bootstrap min CSS. So at the moment we've set this option to disable security and it works fine, but what we'd like to do is not rely on that. So we're now going to implement just hosting the Bootstrap ourselves. So to do that, go to templates. Remember that we have a layout, a custom layout for our Browsershot, which is just this HTML5 template. Let's remove this, and here we want to say, here we want to fetch the CSS block. And then in our Browsershot file, we can specify this HTML CSS is, what we call it, Bootstrap min, and the block would be true, so the default block. Now have a look at this. Is it working just on a HTML view? Yes. So if we go into inspect our code and have a look at the head, we can now see that the style sheet's being embedded, but it's our locally hosted one. Now, does that now work with Browsershot? And I'm hoping yes it does. So now we have our nicely formatted without having to resort to bypassing security on our create method there. Alright, so we're getting it fleshed out. Let's have a look at some more things that we can do. One thing that we haven't done so far is implement a download ability. So if we have a look here at our users thing, we've got the PDF download, but at the moment it's doing that. We don't want that, we want to download. And the other thing that's annoying me here is that it replaces the screen that I'm on. So I can make a change to our view here. So go into templates, go into users, go into index, and just come into your view action here, that you PDF view, and say to it, we've got a target and we want that to be blank. So again, just reload, and now we can see that instead of closing our current window, we're getting that in a new window. So let's implement a download functionality, and we can do that. Notice with our download, if we hover over it, you can see that all we're doing is we're specifying on the query string just download equals 1. So we grab hold of download this request query, get query, choose download, and we're going to convert this to a Boolean, and when it's passing in like this, it's passed in as a string, so that will give us a proper Boolean. If we have a look, so we go download, and we can see that when we specify, right, that's working. So we just get a Boolean for that, and then we go down the bottom and say, hey, if it's a download, grab your response and say with download. Now it gives you the option to create a file name here, so we'll do that, but notice we don't have a file name as yet, so I'm just going to do something that will assist in 2 ways. So we've got file name here, and one thing that problem with downloads is that the file name gets taken from the last element of the URL. So I'm going to go if the file name is null, and this is probably, you probably don't want to be getting a user submit file names. So yeah, maybe that's a bad idea, but just bear with us. And so if there's no file name specified, just redirect to this, so redirect back to this action, and pass along with it. And this could be really, you could generate this dynamically generated or whatever you'd like. Pass that back, and then if there's any query string, just also get query params. There we go. Now let's just make that a little bit more multi-line. That's it, and we need to close it off for it to automatically format. Alright, so if there's no file name, yeah, we definitely don't want a client to be able to specify a file name, do we? So that's a bad idea. So I might just say yeah, we want, yeah, that's fine. It's not going to cause a problem. Let's just leave that. Alright. Well, maybe you can say my let's change that to name. Sorry, I'm making a meal of this. So if So name equals file name equals invoice PDF. Yeah, so yeah, that's better. We certainly don't want anyone to be passing a file name to us. So if the file name doesn't equal that, just redirect. So the first argument, yep, and that will then give us a dynamic file name. So we've got that there, good. Well, let's try this again. PDF create, and there we have the ability to specify a file name on the command line. You would probably want something like this. You'd want to maybe use Kronos, and then I think it's format, yeah. So you might want to do something like YMD, and so give it this sort of thing, so that you would have, you know, a specific file name passed to the method. So obviously let's have a look at both ways now. So we've got PDF view without a download option, and then we've got the download, which then passes through our PDF file to the download for the browser download. So what have we learned today? Well, we've learned a lot, haven't we? So one final thing that I thought we could cover is this challenge. Would we ever want this to be available? Well, one way we can do that, do these things, is we can specify in our headers maybe it's not going to be get addable to by, well, let's have a look. Well, just here what we're going to do is we're going to say debug and die, dump and die, sorry, and this request and get doesn't look like no. Let's have a look at our attributes. I don't even know if this is going to work. Right, so we could possibly maybe, we're looking at for headers, aren't we? So maybe get headers. Let's have a look at headers here. See what's going on here. So if, yeah, the request, can we choose a header? Yeah, so we could choose get header. Let's see if that does what I think it's going to do. Yeah, so if, let's set ourselves a header here, another header, and X request from, and then right, and go if does not equal Browsershot, then let's return this get response with string body. You are not allowed to access that, and with type, I don't know if that's right or not, but let's try that. Right, so let's see if that now works with okay, so that's not working. Let's have a look at what is actually being get heading. Yes, we need to change that, don't we? So let's go up and find our X request from header. Let's see if that's better. And still no good. So we want to see if that actually is doing anything. Let's so copy this, comment it out, paste it in, grab that, and finally let's have a look. Get header. Alright, so maybe that's been our problem all along. Don't know, we'll try. Yep. Okay, so is there another way to do that? This method, okay, header line, let's try that. And let's see if that works. This method returns concatenated together, so we're not really sure yet what that is doing. No, it's still working, so now let's try it again. Alright, so that is saying doing that because it's not returning anything at all. So good. Alright, so now we have a fully working Browsershot installation there with the ability to view and ability to download our invoices there. So I really hope this is useful to someone.